To sexy beer babes.
Pardon me, baby, but what's a nice beer like you doing in a can like this?
Every good brewer knows that to drive sales, you have to market the ever-loving Schlitz out of it.
With just the kiss of the hops.
While beer advertising had long been a part of American culture, remember the Anheuser-Busch combination pocket knife corkscrew? The post-World War II era would see beer advertising reach for new levels of exposure.
The golden age of brewery advertising really came in the years after World War II, when certain larger breweries like Anheuser-Busch and Schlitz were trying to develop national brands. And in order to support that, they started doing national and regional advertising on a scale that had not existed. Lots of full-page ads and television advertising.
Sports broadcast became the perfect forum for the beer business to peddle their brew.
It was very simple at first. It was a matter of a bar owner putting up a television in the bar.
See me there while you're watching the CBS Game of the Week.
And it was a way to actually keep people sitting there in the bar and having a beer and watching the game at the same time. And then later, of course, you could broadcast right into their home.
Beer companies began to seek out identifiable characters, like a Jolly Green Giant, for the beer industry to broadcast across the country.
And they used characters that they repeated throughout their commercials over and over again.
In 1953, the Hamm's Bear of St. Paul's Theodore Ham Brewery became one of history's most recognized advertising figures.
Now, the Hamm's Bear was a jolly fellow who inhabited an imaginary world of little woodland creatures in a memorable jingle that spoke about hams being the beer from the land of sky blue waters. It emerged in the 60s, lasted through the 70s, a time of more innocence than we're in today, in a time when the use of cartoon characters to market alcoholic beverages was a lot more acceptable than it is today, and sadly that led to the demise of the Hamm's Bear.
Whether the advertising featured bears or barmaids, up until the 1960s, beer advertising operated on the same premise: selling the taste of beer.
Big taste.
Miller Brewing Company was about to change that.
It is the champagne of bottled beer.
In the late 1960s, Miller looked for a new image and a way to knock Anheuser-Busch, who claimed about a quarter of the market, off their perch.
They took their Miller High Life, which had been called the champagne of beers, which is maybe the most effete way to sell a beer possible, and suddenly they made that macho too.
You always thought you had the fastest quarter horse in 3 states, and he just proved it. Now's the time to head for the best tasting beer you can find.
In 1971, they launched a new slogan.
They turned it around. They gave us Miller time. Suddenly, because you're a working guy, you deserve a Miller. And the Miller brand just took off.
Sales of Miller High Life shot up 29% over the next 2 years. It was the first beer lifestyle campaign, but it was far from the last. But the battleground had shifted thanks to Rheingold's newest invention, light beer.
Real gusto in a great light beer.
It bombed.
People wanted to bring out a lower calorie beer. They also thought that women would be more likely to drink some of this beer so they could reach new markets. Well, no guy wanted to be sitting there at the time drinking something that said diet. So that's probably one reason why it failed.
That's not to say it couldn't be tweaked.
A couple of breweries later, the Miller Company bought it. And one of the great marketing creations of the 20th century was the turning of this women's diet beer into a macho, sports-based men's product.
Pleasure. Man-sized pleasure.
Miller had the perfect ad campaign to get men to change their mindset.
Their tagline became, to me, maybe the most brilliant tagline ever in advertising. It was, tastes great, less filling.
Between 1973 and 1978, Miller's sales exploded from 7 million to over 31 million barrels. In 1982, Anheuser-Busch got ready to introduce their light beer by taking advantage of one flaw in Miller's marketing. They noticed that in the name Light Beer from Miller, the brewery Miller didn't appear until the end, and they were ready to exploit that.
Miller calls their brand Light Beer from Miller. So you walk into a store and you say generically, give me a light. Budweiser, and they said, let's put our name right in the name. Let's really make it Bud Light. So you walk into a bar and you're asking for a name brand as opposed to some kind of generic.
Today, Bud Light is the #1 selling beer in the world.
Are you ready? I can't do this. No! No way! Not even for some Bud Light?
Throughout the 1980s and 90s, beer advertising got better and better at targeting their male audience.
Bud Light, great taste for your great times.
See you, dude!
Thanks to television, beer was all around us, but the phenomenal growth of Miller, Anheuser-Busch, and the other national brands during this golden age wasn't good for everyone.
Regional breweries started to die out because it was only for a while that they had enough money to keep up with the national advertising. And the national television advertising turned into the thing that drove sales.
It seemed that eventually there would be 3 or maybe even as few as 2 brewing companies left in the United States.
Luckily, the smaller breweries would soon create a whole new buzz of their own with a small idea that proved to be big business.
People in America embrace craft beer, microbrewed beer, because they're looking for products that have a little bit of character, or a lot of character.
Teddy Roosevelt once took over 500 gallons of beer with him on an African safari.